who wrote. And by the way, you're welcome to read, for example, the fantastic book of Mark Brettler, who wrote the Bible, which appeared about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It's a great book. It's a great work. As high level of scholarship as one can hope for. And you'll see there is ambiguity on that, and we should at least face that ambiguity rather than attempt to give fine answers. There are scholars who make very bold claims. And if you look, for example, at the works of Israel Finkelstein, who's one of the great revisionists, archaeologists who tries to look at the Bible and really try to show that what we claim, or what some scholars claim about time frames of biblical writings are much, much later, and he talks about re-editing and how we can look. It's a whole world out there. What I'm trying to say is that we should be very careful before we treat the Torah as a text, at least at this juncture, unless otherwise noted, that can be identified at a certain time at a time.
Tabernacle, like what everything faced toward was what?
Are you asking me now is a historical fact?
I don't know how I'm asking you.
Nobody knows what was put on the tabernacle. If you look at some renditions, it will say the 10 Commandments. If you ask others, it will say the whole Torah. If you ask others, they will say the Aleph of the Anochi, and everything else is interpretation. So it depends who you ask. Okay?
Can I ask a quick question? First of all, Ezra, they started reading the Torah already. This is a question. Did they start reading the Torah already when they were after the first exile?
Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra was in charge of reading the Torah, but we don't know exactly what he was reading. In other words, I don't know.
So it wasn't compiled in any way like you were saying?
The compilation that we know of is a 90th century creation.
Okay.
But for example, we do know that certain books of the Bible, for example, we found a scroll of Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran. Save few minor changes, it's pretty much the same version we have today. So we do know that there is a fluency and continuity.
From when? From first century?
Qumran is as early as 2nd century BCE. So there is a reason to believe that there is a Masoret, a tradition that copied those texts from another, but we don't know in all of them the origins. We can't identify the origins.
The second question, just wanted to also try to get dates in my mind. When did the Sanhedrin start?
The what?
The Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin is the result of the rabbinic period.
It's the end of the rabbinic period.
No, the beginning of the rabbinic
period.
period.
It is the beginning of the rabbinic
period. Wait, I think I missed something. You said that there had been rabbis or some kind of rabbinic tradition even before the temple.
Of course, the Proshim were rabbis. Some of the Tzdukim were rabbis. They were teachers. The term rabbi is teacher. They taught texts, sacred texts. Those texts were not written in 90. They were compiled. They were studied. There were midrashim. Midrashim that appear in the Mishnah had already existed in the days of the temple. What I want you to understand here is not that the rabbinic period started something new. I want you to understand that the rabbinic period was a tremendous, profound shift of authority from the biblical model that is now devoid of those axis mundis, and the assumption that the rabbi by default is now the only leader that can lead the nation towards a viable future that needed to be built now. Because the only way to reconfigure this covenantal relationship was through Torah study. So the only one who can do this is the Torah master. The Torah master. Okay? Yes, I saw a hand. Yeah.
I want to ask you, because what's not included in this Access Mundi is the Ten Commandments.
No, Torah is part of the Ten Commandments.
But you haven't actually got a Torah as the Access Mundi. You say that it comes afterwards.
No, I asked what is left.
That's not what, these are all the things that don't exist.
Okay, so it was always one of the Access Mundis. To me, I would have thought it's the most important one.
That's a rabbinic statement. Yeah, and we'll see in a minute. The Torah was part of the lives. The idea of Torah, the teachings of Torah, for what we know. We don't know the exact configuration. We have reason to believe that what we got in the year 90 is pretty close to what had existed there 300 years ago, 400 years ago. Close. I don't know if I don't know. But what we know is that the teachings of Torah that informed the relationship, the Torah was the one that informed the authority of other axis mundis. It is in the Torah that you learn that the Kohen is an Exis Mundi. It is in the Torah you learn that the prophet is an Exis Mundi. It is in the Torah that you learn that the king is an Exis Mundi. In all of these issues, that the land is an Exis Mundi. The Torah remains untouched because it's textual, because it is oral, because it cannot be destroyed. In the minds of the Jews, of the early Jews of that time, it was the only thing and the most important thing that was left out of a sheer devastation. And now I want you to understand how this is perceived.
The way you're describing it suggests that the direct model with God and these Axis Mundis were destroyed, and so we had to find a new avenue, and that's why we came to the Torah.
Not a new avenue, a heightened or an amplified avenue. Torah was always part.
Contradict what you just said, in the sense that the Torah was always the fundamental cornerstone on which all these other things stood anyway.
No, it wasn't always a fundamental cornerstone, because there was a time when, for example, it is the relationship of the people with God is explained in the Torah, right? In other words, the Torah becomes a canonized document very, very slowly in the history of the Jewish people through the first and second temple periods. What I'm saying here is that through the Torah, when we get to the year 70 CE, and the Torah is relatively intact at this point, we learn about all the other Axis Mundis. We can learn from Torah and Nach and the rest of the books about the roles of those Axis Mundis in the lives of the people. Torah was part of it. Torah was not part and parcel of the people's world. It was very, don't forget, the majority of them were illiterate, even in the Second Temple period, even after the Second. They would appear to they would have accessibility to the Torah through the priests, through the kings, through the prophets, through the scholars, through the rabbis. Here now we do something completely different. The rabbis now, and this is where I want us to go now, I want you to understand how the Torah becomes a much more centralized element in the lives of the nation, not just in the lives of the rabbis, because there's nothing else left. You could be completely illiterate, with no knowledge of Torah, not go to study with anyone, and then you would come and make your sacrificial offering, 2 doves, 3 bulls, blah, 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 and you're all set to go. The priest tells you, you're absolved, God forgives you, you take it for granted, and you go on your business. This is no longer the situation.
When did they start building synagogues? When did they start building the Bet Knesset?
It depends how you identify Bet Knesset. Bet Knesset is not understood as a house of prayer. Bet Knesset is a house of assembly. It is like a JCC. But Bet Knesset existed already in the Second Temple period. There are houses of study, houses of assembly, houses of political dialogues. There were about 400 of them existed in Jerusalem alone in the days of the Second Temple. A Bet Knesset would become a second Mikdash Me'at and understood by rabbis as to be a replica or a small sanctuary, blah, 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 in the rabbinic period. But that's a different story. So again, we have to ask, from what model are we looking at the same thing? So let us now continue, because now it becomes really interesting. If you flip the page, look at the Torah, and tell me what you see. The picture. Anyone ventures to guess?
The breastplate and the crown.
You get a Torah now that becomes a priest. The Torah now is adorned by the attire of the priest. It becomes an Axis Mundi, not only by virtue of its textual potency, but also in the way that it appears to the people. Also in the way that it corresponds with them on a visual level. It becomes the one that enters the Holy of Holies. I want you to now to understand how the physical, the visual corresponds with the new model.
Isn't it like dangerous to go to idol worship?
I'm sorry?
Idol worship comes up from.
Well, first, again,
How you perceive it.
we need to ask ourselves a number of questions. We cannot allow ourselves to look at other Jews from our own vantage point, from our own knowledge, from our own intellectual abilities, from our own levels of sophistication and literacy. There were people who visually needed to have a sense of comfort by knowing that the Kohen is still here. It's just a very, very different type of Kohen. Because just as somebody would not think that the attire itself of the Kohen is the one that saves him, but it's a symbolic gesture to show what is the role of the Kohen, one can assume the same thing for the Torah. The symbolic gesture is to remind the nation that whereas the medium or the axis mundi had changed, the role had not changed. There is still someone or something in this case that negotiates on your behalf should you abide by what it says. So it gives this kind of sense of comfort. Now let's look at the rabbinic literature. Now we move from Torah and Nach to Mishnah and Talmud. These are now rabbinic.